Story 1. This and the following stories are written by the Reddit user AshKey90. This story happened to my sister, who is a traveling registered nurse. Her occupation takes her all over the Navajo Nation reservation, so most times her husband, when he is available, will drive her from and to her next shift. She worked the night shift mostly. They have never shared a ghost story before this, or since. It was between 2:45 a.m. and 3 a.m. in the summertime. If you're from the reservation, you know that most nights are arid with a slight cool breeze. Well, she had finished her shift in Tuba City sometime around midnight, and her husband was driving. Her next job was in Chinle, Arizona, so they decided to go through Kayenta. They were driving on that stretch of desolate highway between Round Rock and Lukachukai. The streetlights from the homes were scattered in the horizon miles away and apart, and most times it is just pitch black. She was half asleep but alert because of all the caffeine in her system and the fact that she is used to being awake all night because of her job. They had not seen another vehicle for an hour or so and were not familiar with the area, having only driven through it a few times. She said they were driving on the road, and in front of them, probably a football field's length, she noticed something splattered across the 2-lane highway. She said it was dark. Roadkill or dead livestock on the road is a common thing on the reservation due to poor fencing and highway maintenance. She figured it looked familiar, but not too out of place. But as they got closer, she said she remembers the shimmer of the dark matter, like wet pavement. She thought to herself it must be recent blood spatter, if it is still wet. Her eyes began darting across the landscape and trying to assess the damage, looking for the animal carcass. The blood puddles spanned the width of the highway, so she thought it to have been from a large animal like a cow or horse. But she couldn't locate the large bloated carcass of any livestock. Something didn't feel right. As rural as the location was and how recent the seemingly wet blood was, she figured no one could have been there that quickly to dispose of the roadkill. As soon as she came to this conclusion in her head, she said her instincts took over. She felt like someone kicked her in her stomach, like the ground falling out beneath you or the way you feel dropping on a roller coaster, but no joyous emotion. It felt bad or evil. She jolted upright and began to scan the dark horizon for any clues. Her husband later said he didn't want to scare her, but came to the same conclusion silently to himself. She said her blood froze, and her heart slightly skipped a beat when she made out a silhouette slowly rising on the left shoulder of the highway. Her mind begins to race with what it could possibly be. We haven't passed any vehicles in a long time, and we were far from the nearest residence. What could be out in the middle of nowhere this late and this isolated? It was standing upright and facing the opposite direction. Her husband begins to speed up as they near it. She doesn't want to look because everything about the situation seems wrong, and she doesn't want to see something she can't unsee. Too late. It's in her peripheral, and she doesn't want to close her eyes because she said that would be more terrifying. Her eyes stay straight ahead, but her curiosity gets the best of her, and her eyes wander off to the left. As the headlights hit the silhouette almost full on, she said it looked like a person standing there wrapped in a white sheet. A white sheet that had been splattered with blood. The figure stands completely stoic, not flinching or shuddering from the light of the vehicle. The figure seems to have shoulder-length black hair that looks jaggedly cut. She said the way the hair hung off the head of the figure, it looked matted or greasy and not free-flowing or clean. They are passing the figure, the husband trying to stay on the pavement but furthest away from the left shoulder that the road will allow. She can't make out the face because the figure has its head bowed down and the hands out in front of it in a prayer stance. Her mind is rushing with thoughts like, what if the vehicle stops working? Or what if whatever it was starts chasing us? Who would be able to help us? They make it to the intersections towards many farms. A sigh of relief. That's one of the reasons Navajo elders tell you to never drive after dark, or really late. Story 2. I heard this story from my sister's co-worker and trusted friend of many years. They've known each other since kindergarten. In small rural reservation communities, it is not uncommon to know someone throughout your lifetime due to limited choices of schools. You basically go to school with the same generation of kids from kindergarten until you graduate high school. This story isn't as detailed or in-depth as many of the other stories that people have shared with me, because my sister's friend explained it very nonchalantly and quickly in passing. She stopped by to pick up cookware that she was borrowing from my sister. Anyway, my sister tells her friend to tell the story to me. It takes her a moment of contemplation to share it. She said that her cousins, who are twin brothers, were always fearless ever since they were kids. They were hard to scare and would never cry or show emotion as far back as she could remember. She continued to say that they would always play freeze tag and kick the can outside after the sun went down, even though their grandma would tell them not to. They would spend the night on the trampoline with no tent, just sleeping bags during the summer, etc. They live out towards Spider Rock when the pavement turns to dirt road, the dirt road that becomes Three Turkey and eventually Sawmill Road. For a few weeks, something kept coming onto the family's property, causing the dogs to howl and bark and the cattle and sheep to get flustered and frantic. It started to get the brothers annoyed and territorial, to say the least. They said they fashioned a sort of tactical weighted netting out of wires and heavy lead pipes. One of the nights, the brothers decided to wait up and stake out whatever has been harassing their animals and property. She said they prepare themselves by taking bitter herb medicine and rubbing black ash from a ceremony fire on top of their heads. They situated themselves above the sheep shed, giving them the best vantage point, allowing for the weighted netting to fall directly on top. They didn't have to wait long. Near the property line, hopping like a frog out of the cedar trees and sagebush, came the Skinwalker with a thud, thud, thud in the soft dirt. They waited quietly as the dogs barked and stayed in front of the doorway to the house. They said it hopped like a disjointed frog or some kind of animal they never saw in the wild. Soon enough, it made its way towards the sheep corral. The sheep got frightened and gathered on the far side of the corral, the furthest point in the entrapped space away from the Skinwalker. At this point, she said bluntly and matter-of-factly that they threw the netting down on top of it and captured it. They jumped down on top of it as well. No weird inhuman screams or shrills, just a very human man yelling for them to let him go. She said they told her the Skinwalker smelled like roadkill or rotten grease. She said they called the Navajo Nation police and stayed with the entrapped Skinwalker until the unit arrived, which on the res was a while. The entire time the culprit was just screaming to let him go home, and he didn't do anything. The cops were Navajo and realized upon arriving what the person was based solely on how the person was dressed and smelling. Dressed in tattered furs and rotten grease and black paint smeared all over their body. I asked, then what happened? She said the cops drove away with the person and told the family that they were going to do a full write-up and all that kind of protocol. However, the family never received a copy of the case or case number in the mail, like the cops assured them they would. I asked her, then what? She said, I don't know what happened after that. She supposed they held the suspect in the drunk tank away from everyone and released them with all the other drunkards the next morning. Before I continue to the next story, I want to say thank you for choosing to watch this video, and I hope you are enjoying my narration. If you are, please show your appreciation by liking this video and subscribing to my channel. It really helps me out. Thank you. Story 3. This was a recollection shared to me by my paternal aunt. This happened when she was a little girl. In the past, it wasn't uncommon for some Navajo families to have large nuclear families, 8 to 10 siblings on average. Being the youngest, she recalls that it was her and her older siblings' duty to herd the sheep to their summer camp in the mountains. The kids were sent on foot with the flock with the sheepdogs. Many households had single cab trucks if they were lucky, so it would be unfair for the parents to take some kids and not the others. So only the parents rode in the vehicle and would await the kids at camp, hauling water and packing summer clothes and essentials such as imperishable food items. The majority of the Reds didn't have running water or electricity, no paved roads at all. She said it took a little under 2 days to walk on foot all the way to their sheep camp if they took a shortcut through a canyon. On the first day, the sun is beginning to hang low in the sky and they decide to make camp. She explained that back then there were many Hogans scattered across the Reds that didn't have permanent inhabitants. They were built with the same intentions as the reasoning behind hunters' cabins, to temporarily provide shelter for hunters, or in this case, sheep herders. She said that these Hogans often had corrals for weary shepherds to house their sheep and livestock for the night and continue on their way the next day. Ranchers and locals would upkeep these safe houses sporadically. She remembers clearly being instructed by her mother which Hogans were meant for that purpose and the ones that had people die in them and were off limits, making them uninhabitable according to Navajo tradition. In place of a door, there was a tattered moth-eaten blanket hanging from the door frame. On the east side, the east-facing entrance was a plyboard. It was meant to be leaned up against the doorway and prevent wild animals, etc. from entering when occupied. Her older brothers gathered wood and started a fire. The smoke went up the stovepipe in the center of the Hogan. She remembers everyone being fatigued and tired after a long day's march. The dirt floor provided a familiar and comforting smell. They laid their sleeping bags out. The plywood board was put up against the doorway. The brothers found long logs to leverage against the board. Staring at the smoke escaping through the smoke hole, she could see the stars in the dark nighttime sky. The smoke hole was unusually eroded away, making it seem wider than typical smoke holes. The dirt piled on the ceiling of the Hogan was probably eroded by wind and rain, not being maintained regularly, packed down with fresh mud. The fire just embers now. As she was drifting off to sleep, she said the sheepdogs that had accompanied them start going crazy outside, howling and barking. She hears the thudding of a horse running around the Hogan. She's startled by a loud thud up against the board at the entrance. The brothers brace the doorway correctly. It doesn't give out. Then she hears a thud on top of the Hogan roof. Dust and debris begins falling from the old-fashioned Hogan roofing under the weight of whatever was walking on top. Her older brother, who is closest to her, whispers to close her eyes. She said curiosity got the best of her, and she kept them open. Rocks the size of gravel started falling down the stovepipe. The Skinwalker was deliberately throwing heavy rocks down the stovepipe, making loud metal scraping noises as they fell into the Hogan's fireplace. In the dark, her eyes dart from the low glowing embers of the fire upward, following the deep blackness of the stovepipe and out the smoke hole. No glowing eyes, just the silhouette of the head and torso of the Skinwalker peeking in. She described it as having ears on the top of its head like a coyote or dog, but the ears weren't of the canine variety. The ears were elongated and pointy. In the darkness, she said they looked like donkey ears, but were positioned on the coyote-like head. She spent a few moments frozen and staring at the creature, never having seen anything that resembled it in nature. It was unaggressive and only watched them for a while. Eventually, it dismounted from the roof and they heard the familiar thuds of horse hooves off into the distance. The dogs howling and whining after it, but never leaving their post at the sheep corral. Story 4. This story was told to me by my auntie. She is from Del Muerto, the northern rim of Canyon de Chelly. Job security and job availability is scarce and almost non-existent on the Navajo Nation. There were no jobs in the nearby communities or towns. Like many residents of the Navajo Nation, she had to find work off the res in border towns. She had been hired by the power plant in Page, Arizona. Depending on the night shift or day shift, she would have to leave home at odd hours to make it to work on time. She explained that she would drive to Page by way of going to Saley, then Lukachukai, then Kayenta, and then finally Page. One time, she started to leave in the very early morning hours shortly after midnight. She figured that she would just make it to Page and sleep in her vehicle until her shift started. She was the owner of one of those late 80s, early 90s Astrovans, the ones with the huge bump it type things on top. It was the definition of a res ride. No AC, busted up. If you drove faster than 60 miles per hour, it would start shaking, etc. She said, somewhere on the desolate stretch of desert road between Lukachukai and Monument Valley, she started to feel uneasy. The uneasiness wasn't a slow, creeping feeling. It was a sudden surge of anguish. She quickly searched the rearview mirrors and scanned the horizon for other vehicles or streetlights from the NHA housings that speckled the landscape in certain areas, searching for some type of familiarity to soothe her uneasiness. No luck. She tried turning the knob on the AM/FM radio in search of any form of radio stations. Still no luck. As her focus darted onto the roadway from fidgeting with the radio, something caught the corner of her gaze. The headlights illuminated the figure on the shoulder of the pavement. As she drove past the area, she said it smelled like roadkill. Very pungent. She described it as a mountain lion with an unusual silhouette. As she drove past the figure, she realized, in the passenger side rearview mirror, that whatever it was gave way to her pursuit. The black mass, with the silhouette of an odd mountain lion, was running alongside the van. She gripped the wheel firmly with sweaty palms and floored the gas pedal. As the van began to accelerate, the wheels started to vibrate turbulently. She watched as the figure fell back and cut across the back side of the van and was stalking the driver's side. The speedometer indicated that she was reaching 60 miles per hour, a detail she had already come to the conclusion due to the turbulence of the vehicle. The Skinwalker began to pick up speed and start to overtake the vehicle. She didn't want whatever it was to make it in front of the vehicle. Her explanation was that she didn't want to see what it was in the full beams of the headlights. She figured she would faint or drive off the road if she saw the details of the Skinwalker. So, as a gut reaction due to the fear, she veered off to the left. She hears a huge thud and the steering wheel jerks off out of her hands momentarily, but she safely regains control of the wheel. The loud thud and scraping can be heard along the entire undercarriage of the van. Her logical thought process kicks in. She isn't sure what she hit, but her instincts tell her to slow down and assess the damage made to the van, to check if she can safely make it to Page without incident or leaking fluid. She turns on her hazard lights and parks in the middle of the road. With a bright LED stormlight-type flashlight, she hesitantly exits the cab of the vehicle. She checks the tires, the grille, underneath the grille, not exactly sure what she was looking for. The smell of roadkill is still very pungent and present. She checks the rear of the vehicle. She is covering her mouth and nose with her sleeve because the smell was so bad. Curiosity gets the best of her. She points the flashlight down the roadway. Before the light of the flashlight illuminates whatever she hit, she hears a woman screaming for help. It sounded like an old lady. She said in the middle of the road there was a bloodied mountain lion pelt and a wrinkled bloody lady. From what she could see, she said the old lady was naked but covered in blood. She said she hauled ass back to the van, still hearing the shrieks of the Skinwalker. She said that she yelled back in Navajo something to the translation of, "That's why you should have just left me alone. You did this to yourself." She makes it to Page with no further incident, as the sun is rising. Story 5. This story recollects what happened during the Navajo Nation fair season of 2015. My roommate and her boyfriend decided to head back to the reservation to take part in the festivities, rodeo, parade, and carnival. My roommate was the offspring of divorced parents and spent her teenage years half on the reservation in Window Rock, Arizona with her mother and half with her father in Phoenix. She was raised as a devout Catholic, even attending a Catholic school. Nothing paranormal had ever occurred to her in her lifetime up until this point. Her boyfriend was an urban Navajo who was a Christian, having been born and raised off the reserve in Phoenix, Arizona. I am declaring their religious ideologies and affiliations because neither of them believed in Navajo traditionalism or ghost stories. Late one evening, after both of them got off work, they decided to head out to make the most of their 3-day fair weekend. My roommate had made prior accommodations with a good friend from high school. When my roommate was a young adult, her mother decided to move away from the res. If her mother still lived in Window Rock, she would have simply stayed there. The accommodations were as follows. Her good friend opted to stay at a close relative's and offered her a 2-bedroom, 2-bath manufactured home at their disposal. The trailer was located off the road between St. Michael's and the first 4-way intersection. The first intersection past KTNN when you are headed towards Window Rock from Summit. Many have called it the back road to St. Michael's, the old original township of St. Michael's, that is. As you can imagine, they arrived to their Navajo Fair B&B pretty late. The trailer was off to the right of the main highway and was situated at the foot of a large rolling hill. There was no streetlight. First order of business, my roommate calls her friend to let her know they arrived safely. They walk up to the trailer and unlock the door and give themselves a tour of the accommodations. They turned on all the lights in every room as they toured. My roommate had driven the entirety of the journey there, so she was a bit more fatigued than her partner. She asked him to go and get the luggage from the car. It was a hatchback. The car was parked about 40 feet away. She explained to me that it had rained some weeks before and the dirt road leading up to the house was wrecked. To avoid bottoming out, she parked on the level ground. She walks into the guest room and her boyfriend is already laid out on the bed. She pleads with him to go and get the luggage, and most importantly, her makeup bag, so she can remove her makeup before bed. She compromises with him that she'll go out with him if he does the heavy lifting. She doesn't want to put her heels back on, so she decides to watch him from the porch. Yes, heels. She worked at a bank and had to always dress professionally in a pantsuit and heels. So, she is standing on the top stair of the small 3-stair porch with the front door slightly ajar. Her hand on the doorknob. Her boyfriend walks off into the pitch black. The light from his phone serves as the only beacon of light signaling his location. As she watches his light grow dimmer and smaller in the distance, she hears what seems to be a pack of dogs howling and barking. She said it sounded like a rumble, a pack of feral res dogs or coyotes fighting. The pack of dogs comes barreling down the large hill behind the trailer. She hears a loud thud against the back wall of the trailer. The thud was so loud she heard the rattling of the picture frames that were hanging. At this point, fear begins to creep into her mind. She calls out for her boyfriend and hears no response. She shouts for him once again. That's when she realizes the dogs have all gone silent. All at once, in a fluid succession of motions, she said that something from inside of the trailer slams the front door, so fast that it creates a gust of wind. She said that if she hadn't been holding onto the doorknob, it would have knocked her off the landing of the front steps. The front porch light flickers and goes dead. She is standing there barefoot in the darkness. She tries to open the door and retreat back into the trailer. She was able to turn the doorknob until it clicked. The door wasn't locked. Something heavy was pressed against the flimsy manufactured hollow core door from the inside. At this point, she said she didn't realize she was crying at the brink of an anxiety attack. Adrenaline took over, and she began throwing herself and all her weight against the door. She said once she saw it inch open, the light from inside flooded the doorway for a split second before it slammed shut in retaliation. Fight or flight, she decides to run barefoot into the darkness to find her boyfriend. His account. He leaves his girlfriend at the top of the front door steps as he walks off into the dark with only his phone serving as a flashlight. He is being very careful where he steps because the earth is turned up and twisted and gnarled. Deep ruts and grooves from a vehicle driving in the mud before it hardens into crust. He is afraid he might twist his ankle. He too hears the frenzied howls and barks of the dogs. He turns to look around at where the sounds are coming from. In the distance, he sees the faint light of the porch light go off. He rationalizes to himself that the dog's barking frightened his girlfriend, and in fear she ran inside and unintentionally turned the porch light off. He continues walking in the direction of the car. He hears the thud of heavy footsteps behind him, mimicking his own stride. Not exactly in tune with his, following a split second after his own thud, almost echoing his own intentionally. Figuring it might be his frightened girlfriend running out to find him, he calls out to her to no avail. He sees a dim flicker in the distance, the light from his phone bouncing off the reflectors off the taillights of the car. His body floods with relief. The relief quickly drains to despair. His phone erratically dies. His heartbeat almost beats out of his chest. How could this be? He wasn't on his phone the entire drive back. It was fully charged. He takes a few urgent paces towards where the car was before the lights turned off. His palms are sweaty, and he swears he could feel his heartbeat pounding in his chest. He desperately reaches into his pockets for the car keys. He begins frantically pressing all the buttons, the lock, the unlock, panic, and open hatchback buttons. Nothing. He even stretches out his hand in the dark as he presses the buttons, thinking he is on the cusp of the electronic radius of the vehicle to respond. Still nothing. The footsteps behind him hastened and almost sound like he is going to be charged from the back. He is too terrified to look back. At this point he realizes the dread he feels in the pit of his stomach means it's something unnatural. His shoulders drop as if he instinctively braces for some sort of impact. The sound of the heavy footsteps would indicate that he should have been hit by now. Nothing. The footsteps loudly lead directly up to him, to his heels, and nothing. He opens his eyes. He hears something like a coin drop and hit the top of the car. He turns around to the patter of bare feet on the dirt road. His girlfriend charges into a full embrace, hugging him and burying her face into his chest. Mind you, his feet stay planted. He doesn't take one step forward or back. The car keys are still in his hand. His thumb presses down. A loud click. The familiar sound of the hatchback automatically opening and the light from the inside of the car quickly floods their immediate surroundings. They grab their luggage and a pair of flip-flops from the car and slowly make their way back to the trailer. Oddly, the front port light is now on. My roommate makes her boyfriend go inside and check all the rooms before she goes back in. He opens the door with ease. He checks each room meticulously. There is no one inside. All the windows are still locked from the inside. I have never retold this account to anyone, but I thought I would finally share before time and life erases all the details from my memory. Once in the safety of the trailer, her boyfriend pulled out his cell phone and it turned on to the same battery percentage. They corroborate their experiences to recount what happened to each. Both of them are dumbfounded at the fact that both of them were shouting at the top of their lungs for the other at the same time or another, but neither of them said they heard the others yelling. Growing up on the res, you hear your fair share of Skinwalker and ghost stories, but this was the first time I heard one where the perpetrator manipulated electronics to a great extent, or even at all. It was also the first case where the perpetrator manipulated sound waves. Both of them swore that they were easily in earshot of each other, but weren't allowed to hear the other's cries. There were no structures or trees between them obstructing the sound waves. He had heard the bark of dogs, but wasn't allowed to hear her screaming out for him. What also spurred me to share this was the massive amount of questioning from some Reddit users. If they exist, why haven't they been filmed or caught on camera? Skinwalkers are just as modern as you and me. Wicked as much as they may be, they are not stupid and deal with smartphones and technology advances as much as anyone. They walk the world as normal people during the day. Story 6 by Reddit user Astrokites138. So I've always wanted to share this story. I've only told a few people, just because I knew nobody would probably believe me, and to be honest, it took a few years for me to come to terms with what I saw. But I still stand by it. When I was 19, I'm 31 now, I lost my job at a Coca-Cola plant in Deming, New Mexico, born and lived there till I was 24. My older brother asked if I would be interested in working in the mines in Morenci, Arizona. He had been there for a month already with a friend, and they lived in an RV park in Clifton, Arizona, and the mine wasn't far from where they lived. I jumped at the chance to get out of my boring-ass town, and in about 3 weeks, I had myself a job there. I would stay with my brother and his friend in the RV on weekends, and we would drive back to Deming to visit family, etc. The RV park we stayed at was actually pretty interesting. On one side there was like a wall where on the bottom it was like a gorge where it would venture off into streams through the town, and on the other a huge cliff. At night, the way the moon hit it, it looked like something out of a painting. Where we were parked to get to the showers and rec room was a straight 200 feet walk, majority of which was through a big-ass courtyard. The thing that did suck was there were javelinas. Sometimes after taking a shower, you would have to haul ass back to your RV or wait in the rec room for them to leave outside. They would sometimes be wandering in the park. I remember one time my brother and friend thought it would be funny to chase a Haveliva family off with bats. It was pretty hilarious, until they got chased back. So one night after dinner I decided to go outside and listen to music. I remember we had a picnic-type bench that faced towards the courtyard. I'm sitting there with my headphones in, bumping System of a Down, when I saw something come into the courtyard. I thought it was a cat at first. It moved like one, but the body was longer. Then I saw the longer ears and I was like, maybe it's a dog. I'm watching it kind of move through the area, but it was already dark so I couldn't see it perfectly. My headphones are still blaring. I decided to get up off the bench and get its attention. I do that thing where you click your mouth to get a dog's attention, and I see the ears go up when it heard me. I'm kind of standing by my RV door and the table still, and I see the thing start to come towards me, but I see it's crouching but moving quick. I'll never forget that. There I am smacking my tongue at it like an idiot, and this thing is moving like a snake. It got about maybe 80 feet before all of a sudden it must have heard something because in the distance it stopped. Its head kind of cocked, and then it decided to run off towards the cliffs. Here's the thing I'll never ever forget. When it ran off, it stood up. It looked like a very skinny boy had been wearing a fur, because when it ran off the skin was dangling but still attached to his head. It was so fast and strange I just sort of stood there like, huh? I really had to just stand there and let my brain process or try to process what I saw. I told my brother and his friend. Of course, they didn't believe me. My brother said it's probably just someone's dog, but that still didn't explain the boy. I told my mum, and she's seen some crazy stuff in her time, but nothing like what I told her. I never saw anything like that at the RV park again. Still saw javelinas wandering, but that was it. I worked for another few weeks but got laid off and went back to Deming. I honestly don't know too much about skinwalkers, but I know I saw something that wasn't in the realm of normal. Thank you for watching and/or listening to this video. Once again, I hope you enjoyed my narration, and if you did, please show your appreciation by liking this video and subscribing to my channel. So I'm almost at my next milestone of 20,000 subscribers, for which I'm planning a Q&A video. If you have any questions, you can message me on Twitter at @HorrorNarrative, my new Mr. Sinister subreddit, or post your questions in the comment section to this video. If you want to support my channel even further, consider purchasing a t-shirt or hoodie with my new logo on from my recently launched Teespring store. Thanks again for watching.